Oh, you went. Just going now. It's just redirecting. I've written notes. That's a first.
You're going to be one of those interviews, Cal.
Yeah, the notes will fly over my shoulder at some point or another. You know that, don't you?
Of course.
So
of course.
thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me tonight. And I know that you're here with us in the UK far longer than you thought you would be or anticipated. And obviously, you know, the world's gone mad since you came over in December. And I know that you came into spiritualism, you were known as one of the youngest mediums at that time.
I was.
So how did you get into, I know your church, is it correct to say it was Wolverhampton Church?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all right, there's a thunderstorm just beginning here. I don't know whether it's reaching Longton yet, but it's just beginning here.
Lovely.
That's the Black Country for you, though. So yes, I was. I mean, I think I was 17 when I walked into Wolverhampton Church, and I started there. I went out of curiosity. I hadn't lost anyone. I didn't follow a lot of the people's paths where I'd gone in out of bereavement. I went out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And then I went looking for, well, for want of a better description, I went looking for God, because I'd gone to church as a child up until I was 15. Excuse me. And so I always felt there was something beyond this. And so I'd always had an interest in what was back then a very unusual spiritual path. It was always, when I was at Sunday school, I always asked too many questions. And so that's how I ended up going to Wolverhampton Church. And back then, obviously, there was no internet, no communication. Obviously, it was horse and cart. We all traveled around in, you know. So I used to be advertised in the local newspaper, and that's how I ended up there. And I walked in on a Monday afternoon and basically never left.
Yes.
And it all began from there.
Can you remember who the medium was, Simon?
You know, I've tried many times to recall that. I know it was a lady, and the strange thing was I only ever saw her that once. It was peculiar. I'm sure she must have served the church, you know, afterward. But I cannot remember her name. But she made a big impression on me, and literally I never stopped after that.
Right.
I just kept going and going and going.
Going as part of the congregation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I never harbored any thoughts that I had abilities myself.
So when did they come to the fore?
Well, I just have to sort of backtrack a little bit, because I'd had an interest in all things spiritual, if you will, or outside the orthodox, for the longest time when I was a child. And when I was about 13, I had a set of tarot cards, and so I began reading the tarot cards then. And so that sort of took my interest in an intuitive sense. But again, with the tarot, you can read the tarot and not necessarily have an intuitive ability. You can still read them without having that. But of course, having an intuitive ability gives you a much more rounded understanding of what you're dealing with. And so when I went into Wolverhampton Church, after I'd been there a while, they asked me to sit in the developments of the open circle. And then it went from there to a closed circle. And I sat with Sheila Green when she used to run the open circle there.
Right. Wow. And those were the days where I remember you in the 80s and late 80s, 90s with an absolute mop of hair.
Absolutely.
Wavy hair, which you were very proud of. I do remember
I was. And now it's mainly on my chin. But you know, I had a cascade of hair,
You
and
did?
I obviously, you know, there's the wonderful story of serving Longton, and of course with Paul and Janet on
Yes.
the Christmas Eve service, where I actually set fire to that mane of hair.
Yes.
In
Yes, I
the,
remember. We can laugh about it now.
exactly, which is indelibly burned on my brain and on my skin. You know,
Yes.
I'm
I
sure I
didn't
could.
know you had a connection with Michael Jackson, and there he is.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, now I could have sued the church possibly, but back then we did it just purely for the love of it,
You
and
did. You
the
did.
degree burns. You know?
Yeah, and I remember the big jackets. Of course, those were during the period where shoulder pads and
Mhm.
collar was a great part of our garments, wasn't it?
Well,
So
the thing was, I mean, when obviously I came into it, and obviously at the moment I'm looking at you know, many of you guys. So I've got, you know, I'm looking at Janet and Paul and you know, the memories that we have. And so back then, you know, well, particularly for guys, if you know, it was suits, three-piece suit, tie, you know.
yeah,
You know, I pride myself on claiming to be the first medium at the Arthur Finney College to demonstrate on the platform without a tie, you know, and I had to receive special permission for that, you know. So it was a big thing to sort of
yes,
break down or be yourself, because it was a very regimented system, you know.
yeah.
So yes, I for demonstrations particularly, you know, I always had the clothes, and you know, when Paul and I were working, I always remember, I cannot remember this lady's name, and Paul will remind me. I remember walking walking into Longton, and Paul and I, we had those different coloured jackets, and so we always had to speak to one another beforehand which colour jacket we were going to wear, so we didn't clash, you know. So we both had red jackets and purple jackets and green. And Paul had a green one. And then the one night we turned up and we were both wearing red jackets, and you know, it was, you know, it looked like red coats from Butlins. And And I always remember this one lady, I cannot remember her name. She just sits at the back, and I hadn't seen her for a while, and she says, "Oh, she says, I'm so glad you're not wearing that jacket." She says, "I hated that red jacket." So, but at least we were remembered, you know.
I don't know if Paul will remember who it is. I can see his head. He's going, no.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I just wondered if it might have been Joyce Bagley, because she could be very direct.
Yeah, I know. It was one of the old guard who was always
Yes,
direct, you know. So,
yes, they were like that, weren't they? Very much
yeah.
so.
Oh yeah,
So
she definitely knew.
when you first went into the spiritualist church, were you at college or were you working?
Yeah, well, I was actually, when I first went into Wolverhampton, I was doing my A-levels. So I was doing my A-levels, and then I did a degree in well, applied science, but it was psychology and human biology.
Yeah.
So I was doing my degree at the same time as I was doing my development, and so it was always a bit of a juxtaposition because of going to the lectures on psychology and behavioral psychology, and being told that any form of idea that consciousness survives death was utter witchcraft. And then in the afternoon, running and doing a service at Sutton, Coldfield, or Wolverhampton, you know, and the churches on the weekend, and then demonstrating, obviously, that it was a completely different paradigm to what I was learning in academia. So it was a little bit of a mind twist, because it was a bit like playing Batman, you know, or now Superman, where Clark Kent is a mild-mannered reporter, and the weekend he comes out as Superman. Not that I'm describing myself as Superman, but there was that complete clash of paradigms, if you will, of the.
How did that sit in your mind?
I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it, because it was well, academia, and obviously I recommend academia, but academia and the intuitive development can very much struggle, because people often ask me later on, can I mix the two? And I will always say is no, keep it in two minds, you know. Be your academic, and then be your intuitive. and actually view them as just different viewpoints of the world, because otherwise you're fast tracking a migraine more than anything else.
Well, yes, because in academia you've got the references and you've got the evidence and the proof.
Absolutely.
100% all of the time, and you've got to back everything up, and then you sit in development and feel and sense your way through things. Yeah, they're just opposite poles, aren't they?
Exactly. So it was a tough time, but it was a great time, because it was a great learning for me, because, and again, you know, my colleagues who I'm looking at here, Paul and Janet, when we started, you did your churches because that was your apprenticeship. You know, you did your afternoons, you did your Monday afternoon, you did your Sunday afternoon, and like obviously Longton. I remember, because I was so excited, because I did my first Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
I just finished I just finished a set of exams, and so I was more thrilled that I'd been invited to do Monday afternoon, than I had with finishing my exams, you know.
Right.
And so I remember being so excited to go up to Longton and do that Monday afternoon, because obviously I'd been asked, and if you'd been asked to serve Longton, then you knew that your work, or at least you had the potential, your work of being validated,
yes,
to a high standard. You know.
So when did you meet Gordon? At Wolverhampton, or?
I first met him at Wolverhampton, and I said, you know, what was introduced, and Paul was there, I think, because I thought I'm sure Paul had brought Paul had brought Gordon from Longton, and I saw Gordon in a demonstration. And why I remember is because I'd got a friend with me, and I said, we're going to see Gordon, and I hadn't seen Gordon before, I'd only heard about him, and this was at Wolverhampton. It was a Saturday night dem, and so we got there like ridiculously early, because we knew the place was going to be packed, and Wolverhampton back then had a small car park, so we got there about 90 minutes early, just so we could get a seat and park the car. And that's when I saw him from afar, and I think I said hello to him. And then really I met him after that on Longton Week at the Arthur Findlay College.
Yeah. You went on as a tutor or as a student?
No, this was a student.
You were a student.
On Longton Week. It was back then. It was Longton and Wolverhampton Week.
Yes.
And you know, the churches used to do joint weeks together, and that's where I met him. And this is what we always try and tell people is, back then at the college, we didn't do anything. I remember the week distinctly, because it was a turning point in my life. It was so important for me.
Yeah.
And there was Gordon, there was Coral was on the week. Obviously, Paul was there organising and sorting Gordon out. And there was Coral, there was Martin Young, there was Mavis Patilla, Jill Harland, Nan Porter. And if you never met Nan Porter, she was just the most amazing person that I met. She was just wild, absolutely wild. And, you know, it was so great, because that was, and there were other mediums there as well, whose just name escapes me now. You've asked who were there, but and it was just an amazing week, because we never really did anything other than listen to lectures. And now there's a curious thing here. Now, this is a spooky thing that's just crossed my mind, which is really interesting. So there's obviously something to this supernatural stuff after all, because the first time I ever got onto the platform, Gordon asked me to come up. It was a Tuesday night on Longton Week, and so you had to put your hand up. Would anybody like to work? You know, would anybody like to have a go? Well,
yeah.
There's no way I was going to put my hand up, because I'd only just started in the circle, you know.
Yeah.
Gordon picked me to go up on the platform, and I think there was Martin, there was Mavis Patilla there, and I can't remember who else was on there may have been one more on the platform. And the interesting thing was, that was the first contact I ever built. I mean, it was a tiny little bit of a thing, but I know the evidence I gave, or the information I gave, was about a thunderstorm and thunder. Now it's just thundering here at the moment.
Right.
Oh, that's just really cool. That's so fun. That's just a great memory for me that we're actually talking about that. So, and I remember Gordon talking about this recipient that I gave the contact to, when they would always stop the circle if there was a storm, there were thunder and lightning, because it's that they believed it affected the energies. So that's just that's a really nice memory. That is, a wonderful piece of synchronicity there.
So you met Gordon, and I'm sure he encouraged you to carry on and to. Well,
the interesting thing is that I listened to the lectures, and as I say, we did nothing. I think I did one more circle on that week, and then the last day, back at the college, they used to do a presentation, student presentations. Well, they just picked about 3 people. I was one of them to do the afternoon demonstration, and I demonstrated. But before then, I'm listening to a lecture. It was a lecture with Gordon Coral Polge, the great spirit artist. And I'm just sat there with the rest of the crew from Wolverhampton Church. And Gordon walked past me in the library, and he stood next to my chair, because we'd all clapped him as he'd come off the platform.
Yeah.
And he stood next to me and said, one day, he said, you will be up on that platform and they'll be clapping you. And I thought he was talking to somebody else, because, I hadn't done anything. I wasn't teaching. I hadn't even thought about it. And I certainly I'd only done a contact on the Tuesday, and he's then talking about me working there and clapping, and then, and of course, obviously after that, I mean, you've got to remember, I mean, people talk about Gordon now as if they knew him, and as if they're, there's 1,001 people. I think he's taught more people now he's gone than he did when he was alive.
He's very busy, isn't he?
He's extremely busy. I feel sorry for him, actually, because
rest in peace.
Leave him alone. He worked hard enough in this world. Never mind afterward. It was like being touched by the master, and of course my friends on the course, it's like, oh my God, Gordon spoke to you, and I thought, I'll never wash this shirt again, because but it was that big a deal, and I was just bowled over, and then I demonstrated on the Friday, and that was it, and then it sort of began, really. Well, that's where it all began.
Yeah.
And out of that, I then did my first ever service at Sutton Coldfield Church one Monday afternoon.
Right.
So that was again racing from college, and doing the demonstration in the afternoon.
So did you go to Wolverhampton Uni?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I went to Wolverhampton.
Because I know you lived in Dudley, didn't you? That's
right.
That's where you came from. So how did that transition for you feel, from going from student to then? And I know that like Paul and like Janet, you all worked your socks off, and I don't think you had a lot of peace, any of you. You were always so busy. How did that transition go for you from being unknown to being in demand?
It was a strange time. I mean, I think this is the interesting thing, is because a lot of people would always say to me, is that when I was young, that
you're still young.
Well, I'm still young, absolutely.
Yes.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I was younger, let's put it this way, that, it must be wonderful that you've come into this so young, and you've got so much time ahead of you. I think the difficult thing is that there's a positive side to that, and the positive side is, you have, if you will, the energy of youth, the exuberance of youth, the enthusiasm. The only problem is that you then have the inexperience of life.
Yeah.
And I've always been a little bit of innocent abroad, really, because I would always walk into situations and expect the best from people, and so I was always shattered when I didn't always get that response, you know. So yeah, I got beaten up a lot back then, just because I expected people to behave in a certain way, you know, and you expect at that point everybody to be, you know, the dreaded catchphrase "love and light," you know, not so much. But I was so, but I don't regret it for a minute, because I came in at the really, and again, I don't mind saying this, I came in at the tail end of the golden age of mediums, because a lot of people who talk about these people now never met them, but I was so fortunate to meet them, and in many cases work with them, and obviously in Gordon's case to be taught by him. So you know, you cannot trade that or barter that for anything.
No.
And I wouldn't change that for a minute. But sort of running around the country, going to different churches and seeing different places in the UK. I mean, that was an experience. I mean, we've all got stories of going around, you know, very often we were together running around the country and cars breaking down. Paul will remember that. You know, or you're driving, you know, 6 hours to do a dem, and then you're still driving another 6 hours to come back. And but it was great experience, because that's where you did your apprenticeship. That's where you learned your craft, you know. And I think, and I want to make this point here, is at no point did I ever think of teaching. It was never a thing to do. It was never a point to go to. Where today, it seems as if it's the next stage in the link in the career that I become a teacher. But when we all began, that wasn't how it was set up. You know, you didn't think, oh, I'm going to be a teacher. I'll become a medium, then I'll become a teacher. You just wanted to become the best medium and exponent you could be. If your teaching ability, your teaching mediumship shone, then so be it, they're all to the good. And I remember Gordon distinctly saying that, you know, you need to have established yourself as a medium, and this, when I talk about this, as a demonstrating medium in your power for at least 5 years before you even contemplate teaching. Because you just don't have the power to teach. You don't have the experience, but also you don't have the power in your own mediumship to teach. Where today, you know, it's, you know, do a workshop and then suddenly I can set myself up online and I've got I've got my credentials, or I've gone to the Arthur Findlay College for a week, and then suddenly I'm the world's best teacher. It doesn't work. No. And it never worked.
No.
You know, and I think we're seeing we see the fallout of that today.
Yes, because we've all seen people who say something like, oh yes, I went on a workshop with Simon James or Janet Parker or Paul Jacobs, and they're my mentors, and they've spent 4 hours with you, and suddenly you've mentored them, and that's a trade-off, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. It's like saying, well, you know, I'm thinking of building, you know, I'm thinking of building a nuclear missile, because I once went to a lecture by Stephen Hawking. You know, it's the same thing. It's ridiculous, you know, and you know, it's so important to realize that you wouldn't go to a heart surgeon that has just done a weekend workshop in heart surgery. You know, I wouldn't put my hands in someone with that minimum of ability. So why would anybody else put their hands, or put their soul, if you will, in the hands of a so-called medium that's just done a weekend workshop?
Yeah, but it happens all over the world.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
So when you began teaching, was, you said you weren't looking for it. So was that a surprise to you? And I guess you were asked rather than you asking as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, see, again,
That's
this is,
the difference, isn't it?
it's the difference. I mean, today, everybody asks, I want, or in the worst case scenario, I tell, I am going to be this, I am going to do that, I am going to be so and so and so and so. Just sort of digress here. One of my bugbears is so many people today, as a teacher, they will say, well, I'm going to be a trance medium. Oh, okay. Have you asked the spirit world about that? Have you been inspired by the spirit world to do that? Oh, no, that's what I want to do. Well, you might want to find someone to work with you then, because otherwise you're just going to sit there opening your mouth and closing like a goldfish because there's nobody going to be there. You don't tell anybody what you're going to do. That's never how it worked. And and I know my friends here will back me up. You didn't go to Gordon and say, I want this, I want that, I'm going to be this, because you never see him again.
No.
It just didn't. And none of the what I call the golden era of mediums, the Betty Wakeling, Mary Duffy, all of that crew, some of mine just Albert Best. I mean, you would never in this world come up to them and go, I'm going to be this or I'm going to be that.
You'd be shot down in flames.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't even begin to even repeat what Albert Best would say, it just But
no, we haven't reached the 9 o'clock watershed yet. No.
Exactly. But these people knew their craft, and I think really where we are at this level, and the memories that we're sharing, we sort of are from that place in which we can try to continue their legacy, if you will. I do, and Brian Robson, obviously, of course, back in at our centre there, the Inner Quest, the Open Door Sanctuary, we continue to do that. And it's disheartening where you see people now saying, well, this is what I want. So Gordon asked me to prepare a lecture. And I tell this story because it's, I don't mind sharing because I think it's a good teaching story. And I do this whenever I teach teachers, is because no matter what you think you've taught or what you think you've done, one, you can always improve, but at the same time, you also have to develop a very, very tough skin. And this is one of the great gifts that we had when we were younger, with the, if you'll, experience we had.
Yeah.
And again, I was at the college, I was with Paul.
Yeah.
And Gordon asked me to put a lecture on together on the psychology of mediumship. So I got my flip charts. Obviously, PowerPoint didn't exist then, or anything like that. We just used paper and pens. And so I'd done my research, and I put this literally 30-minute lecture together on the psychology of mediumship for Gordon, because he wanted me to introduce the themes of psychology into the Arthur Findlay College, because those areas just weren't touched. And I don't want to turn this into a lecture, but the psychological stresses within mediumship, the psychological dynamics of working with your mediumship, both as a recipient and as a medium and with the spirit world, just weren't talked about. And also, on one level, the general neurosis of mediumship, and how to cope with it.
Yeah.
And I did this 30-minute lecture, and I was quite pleased with myself because I was nervous to heck. I was in the library, and I was obviously in front of Gordon. Obviously, there's your teacher. You want to support him and support the trust he's put in you. And I thought I'd pulled it off. Anyway, Gordon afterwards said, that was okay, but he's never going to give you a big hug. He's never going to sit there and say, my heart touches your heart, and I honor the spirit in you, or any of that stuff. That wasn't Gordon. But it automatically tell you what you didn't do right, and we need to do this, and you need to that, and you cut it short, and this is what and so on. But the first person, even before Gordon got to me, was the lady in the audience. She came up to me and she said, and I was, young man, and she said, young man, I didn't learn anything from that lecture.
Oh.
Absolutely. And that was the first person who spoke to me after my first ever lecture in front of my teacher at the Arthur Finney College.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Now back then we had definite work experience.
Yeah.
And I know Paul and Janet will definitely agree with me here. We had work experience because, but what was so good and why I remember that is because, and this is the thing that with Gordon, back now, if you will, now everybody's touchy-feely, and if somebody's having a bad day, we sit down and you've got to find out the reason why, and we have to support and all the rest of it. So the teaching system has changed, the support mechanism has changed. Back then, you were thrown into the ocean and they would watch you swim back to shore. And you could be drowning and they would not throw you a life belt. And today, if you did that, so many people would be like, oh, that's, you're so cruel, you're terrible people. Where's the love in your heart,
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that I think, and that was, and it's only now at this stage of my life, particularly, when I look back with Gordon, the great teachings that he gave us, because I had two choices with that person, that lady that came up to me. I either took that on board and never ever worked again.
Yeah. I
allowed myself to be crushed in front of basically, I think, 70 people or whatever. I would allow myself to be crushed in front of the man that I respected, who was pretty much the 20th century's greatest medium and exponent of what I was trying to do. Or I could take it on the chin and begin to examine, now, why did she have to do that? What was she getting out of that?
Yeah.
And obviously I had a little bit of a helping hand there because of my background in psychology, because I then had to understand, well, what was she getting out of trying to put me down? What was she getting out of making me feel small so that she could feel tall? And that's very, very common, obviously, with people's behavior. Now, was I still hurt? Absolutely. Was I still beaten up? Absolutely. Because I was very vulnerable in doing that. And of course, she saw that vulnerability and went straight for it, But it was a very good lesson because, obviously I didn't listen to her. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this chat tonight, But it was a very good lesson. And I think that the teaching that we had back then was superlative, in the sense that we were forced to stand on our own 2 feet and not keep running back to daddy or mommy or whoever the particular teacher was. You had to swim,
I think part of it back then, and the difference now, is that you didn't have, any of you, that attitude of being entitled.
No.
You all worked because you saw something within Gordon that reflected upon all of you, that said, if you work, this is what you achieve. But if you sit back and do nothing or expect others to do it for you, there will be absolutely no point. And as you said before, we see what happens now in this day, about how people quickly come in and quickly want to teach. It's
I mean, absolutely. I mean, when Paul and I worked together at the start, when Gordon put us together, we've got so many shared stories of what we went through. And I think this is the thing that people look back, if you weren't there, they look back to that time of a golden age where everything was wonderful and everything was fantastic. There were parts of it that were fantastic. There were parts of it that were very, very difficult.
It wasn't fluffy, was it?
It wasn't fluffy, and, certainly I know Paul and I definitely were attacked by people. And we had prejudice against us because we were young, and also we were, you know, under Gordon's wing, you know, and Gordon shielded us a lot from it. But I know for a fact that at the same time, we were also attacked because of people of jealousy, their own lack of self-worth. I know also Janet was in her way. You know, it's a recognition of people's insecurities, and particularly when you're young, you're easily knocked about and beaten up, you know, and those are some of the unpleasant sides of it. But you know, there was also some fantastic memories that we all have. And I mean, there was always the old, just a funny story, I'm sure Paul may have told you this, but one of the times when Paul and I were working, we were taking Gordon down. I remember it was in my car. It was my old 1980 Ford Fiesta, which had to be seen to be believed because I was never sure whether it would get us there, but it did. And Paul and I were with Gordon, and we were taking him down to the South Wales Summer School and then on to Paynton Church for the weekend, Gordon's weekend. And back then, people have always had those stories where you mustn't eat before a demonstration. You know, there was always those old ideas, and I have to not eat. I have to make certain that I'm light before I demonstrate, all those things. And so we got to the South Wales Summer School, and Betty Wakeling was there. And there was, and so Paul and I thought we'd done for the night because we got Gordon settled. And so they had this amazing buffet. So we just basically, Paul and I just packed it away, you know, and we just vacuumed all this food up, and it's fantastic. Real good stuff. Dessert, everything was packed it away. And so, and they announced that obviously Gordon would be demonstrating this evening to the students of the South Wales Summer School. And so we was ready to sit back and just basically digest this huge amount of food and listen to Gordon. Next thing I know, we both know, Gordon says, "Oh no, I'm not doing it, you are." So, you know, it was like, good grief. We were like rolling ourselves to get up onto the platform. We're like, oh no. But you didn't say you said no, you didn't say no to Gordon. You couldn't say no to Gordon. You just had to get on with it. And it was such good teaching, because it also meant that you went past your own limitations, or the limitations you believed in yourself, because you just didn't want to say no. And so you did it.
Yeah. Did
I enjoy it? Well, I would have enjoyed it if I hadn't got like half a strawberry gatto in my stomach. But I got through it. And that was the wonderful thing, you know, because it was such a good lesson and a good teaching.
But as Paul says, there was so many lessons in everything that he said and did, but he didn't actually give direction.
No.
He just let it hang there.
Absolutely. No, and this is the thing. Again, today the teaching style has changed so much, because everybody asks direct questions, and well, what is this? And tell me this, and give me the secrets of the universe, and I would like to drain you of your entire knowledge. And Gordon never did that. Basically, you know, you'd say to him, well, I've never done that before, and basically look at you, and it's, well, now's your big moment, you know. And you just got up and you had to do it, and you learn by doing. And that was and again, at the time I found it very painful, and because your ego doesn't like being battered, and you're petrified of falling flat on your face in public. And I've got lots of stories of falling flat on my face in public with Gordon, you know. I did a huge fall down with Gordon, my first ever demonstration with Gordon at Longton, and it was packed on a Monday evening. And obviously they come to see Gordon, and then there was this young whippersnapper that he was throwing out just to see what would happen. And I was so nervous, absolutely so nervous. And the demonstration was just not good at all. And I just wanted to die. And I wanted to die. And I sat on the platform. And the worst thing about it is that you went first, obviously, because that's how it works. Experienced medium always goes afterward. so I went first, and it was just not good at all. I was so nervous. And then you had to sit. And remember Longton at the time, you'd look at us at Longton and the ocean of faces, and they never gave you a thing.
Nothing's changed.
There was nothing came back. And you went to the back row at your peril, because so many mediums went to die at the back at Longton Church. Because they were the stalwarts of Longton Church, and they'd seen it all. So they weren't going to give an inch, And if you worked at Longton, you had to come up with the goods. And again, the den was just not good enough, and Gordon didn't say a peep. But then I had to watch where he demonstrated. Well, of course, he just stood up and coughed, and everybody, round of applause. And he gave this, sterling demonstration of mediumship, and I had to sit there and compare myself. And again, the lesson was not to compare yourself, because how could I compare myself to somebody who'd been doing it for years and I was just starting?
Yeah.
But these were the lessons that Gordon gave us by not saying something, but putting us in positions where we had to figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah.
And, those lessons are priceless, because it allows the soul to rise, and it allows the soul to teach us.
Yeah.
And it also recognizes as well that, afterward, Gordon wasn't around to put out the safety net and catch anybody.
No.
So you had to learn quickly, and you had to learn to be within your own power and own presence.
And that builds your resilience, doesn't it?
Exactly. Absolutely.
So that you can go and do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that you didn't just restrict your demonstrations to churches or centres either. You went out and, you went to pubs and clubs and places like that, which was not a popular idea. I know that, because I've had those conversations with Paul, and I know that you used to go, and you actually made a massive difference in people's lives, but they weren't churchgoers, were they?
No, I mean, this was back at the time where, and I think this is the thing, that we worked at a club, Paul and I. We were asked to work at a club, and it was shut down. Obviously, it was the venue itself that was being used.
Yeah.
So there was no club, there was no music, there was nothing going on or everything. But they were just using it for people who wouldn't necessarily ever come to a church. And the experience of that was very, very powerful, because it enabled us to reach people and speak to people, and also to have feedback from people who would never enter a congregation, And the thing is, the most important thing is, with anything that someone does, is their respect for what you're doing. And where we did, and the way it was set up, it was done in a respectful way, where people who had lost loved ones, who lost children, came, and it was just the physical space we were using, even though it was a nightclub that was closed for that evening. But I don't have a problem with it, as long as as it's done with respect, and it was back then. Yeah. But it was a wonderful training ground, to also speak to people in a real way, because the problem with so-called spiritual speak, there is a lot of sort of medium speak.
We have codes, don't we?
Where someone dies of a certain condition, or there's a lot of love around you. Well, I don't understand. I don't know what that means. And, they died of a heart condition. Now they died of a heart attack, or they died of a heart problem. There's lots of conditions, but don't put a condition on it. Don't talk to ordinary people about vibrations or pseudo-scientific claptrap, basically. Just speak to people in a human way, because we don't speak to other human beings in this falsified so-called spiritual way.
Yeah. We do have our own language, don't we?
We do, and I think the problem is, I think that the crux of the matter there is, it's a learned language. We learn it from other mediums, It's not something that we develop on our own. We speak it because we hear of it.
Yes.
And so when I came in, like Paul and Janet, you know, there was, I've got your father here and he's coming in on a purple vibration, you know, whatever that's supposed to be, you know, or he has a condition of this or a condition of that. You know, and I know originally where the terms come from within the history of spiritualism, because they actually meant a certain thing. And then they became so abused that, you know, you could see a demonstration of mediumship where somebody would stand there for 90 minutes and not really say anything at all.
Yes.
You know, or give you anything at all. And hopefully we have to try to sort of keep minimizing that. And instead of just saying, I've got your mother here, she's sending lots of love, just say your mother is here and she loves you.
Yeah.
You know, because nobody, you know, you don't meet somebody and go, I'm sending you love. You know, if you say that to somebody, they go, this is the last time I'm meeting you, you know. You don't send love to people, you know, you express love to people. So we really need to sort of begin to, you know, use that language. And the interesting thing is Gordon never said stuff like that.
No, he didn't. No.
I never heard him say I'm sending love or anything like that. And he never ever gave a message either.
No.
Never a message, because the message was in the evidence.
Yes.
You know?
I heard not long ago somebody say, we don't want mediums who give evidence. People want a message.
You know, well, again, this is the bastardization of what we do. And it's one of my bugbears, is because, you know, the message part is just purely a spiritual band-aid, you know, and mainly the message that Gordon ever gave to somebody, generally speaking, at the end was, be a good boy or be a good girl, you know, and come and tell me if I'm right, if when you tell me when you're wrong and you find out that I'm right. That was basically the message. But there wasn't, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, you're going to do the other, because the message was, as it always was in mediumship, I'm not dead. And this is the information I'm giving you. This is the evidence I'm giving you. And the message is, death is not the end. And that's enough.
Yes.
Because if you know that there's life after death, then the message is, go away now and live your life and get on with it.
Yeah.
Because you've just had your evidence, you know. But unfortunately, we have a big problem with the addiction to messages, because we have, well, not we, but certainly in general, we have created a society of message addicts, which is pretty toxic. Yeah. And doesn't speak well to us or speak well to mediumship, because that's not what it's about. That's certainly never what Gordon ever taught.
I think it comes down to that resilience again. People generally, not everybody, but there's certain sections of society that are not resilient and don't challenge themselves anyway, so they don't build that resilience to work through their issues. They expect Simon James to give them a message and tell them how to put it right. Absolutely.
And, you know, I joke about this all the time, but, you know, from a teaching point of view, when somebody comes to, you know, if someone ever asks me, should I get married? I will always ask them, well, do you want to get married? And they say, well, yes. I said, well, get married then, you know, or I know I don't want to get married. Well, don't get married then. You know, you shouldn't be asking a medium such powerful questions like that, you know. But the point is, we use our sensitivity to go behind that question to find out, why are they asking that question?
Yeah.
You know, what is it about them that they don't feel strong enough to decide for themselves whether I want to marry this individual or not? It may be because of a previous issues with their own self-worth, with their relationships, and so on and so forth. But I will never even dare to try to answer a question like that, because it's not mine to answer.
What do you think is the most ridiculous thing you've ever been asked? I know there'll be many.
Oh, I think probably this was the most ridiculous thing. One of the most ridiculous things. It sticks in my memory just because it was ridiculous. It was also unpleasant as well, and it was at the Arthur Finney College. It was on Open Week many years ago, and a lady walked into the room with her son, and her son was about 8, I would have said, well, I will never ever work with children unless there is a specific need and the parents are there, the guardians are there, and there is a specific point, because it's too dangerous and it's just not respectful or right where the child is concerned. So before I even started, I went down to the desk and I said, you know, what's going on here? And they said, oh no, it's legitimate. There's a need for the child to be with mom. I said, okay. So I sat with mom, and while I'm talking to her and the son's there, and I basically just said, you know, I'm just going to talk to your mom for a bit, and you know, just relax. I'm just going to chat to mom.
Yeah.
And he got a colouring book, and so. And as I'm working, you know, there's nothing there. There's no impulse. There's no, because you would think, oh well, she's come in with a child, perhaps she lost her husband or the father, and there's a need for reunion or of some description or whatever.
Yeah.
And there was nothing, and I didn't even talk to the little boy other than that. And I said to the mother, I said, so do you have any questions at the end? And she says yes. She says, how many cars do I have? I said, don't you know? I said, because I would really advise you to find out. I said, because that's a real worry if you're not sure. And she said, is my son going to be a doctor? I said, I have no idea. I said, but I think the wonderful thing will be to see what he wants to do when he grows up. She says, well, I want him to be a doctor. I said, well, why don't you allow him when he's older to find out for himself and to make his own choices? And I let them out. And I thought that was possibly one of the most ridiculous things, but also as well, what I think that the saddest thing there for that mother was that she was using her child to try to force some kind of mediumistic experience, but also to validate her needs and wants as opposed to her son's. And I often thought many years, you know, that was a long, long time ago. And I often thought after that, I wonder what happened to that little boy. What did he grow up to be? You know, I hope he grew up to be whatever he wanted to be, you know. But I think what that point also just illustrates is one, the silliness of things that people ask, but also the misunderstanding and also the possible abuse of mediumship in people's minds.
Yeah. Wow. Now, I know you like challenging yourself. So you started Spirit of Youth, or you had a great involvement in those early days of Spirit of Youth. How did that come about? Well,
how it came about more than anything else is because, you know, when I suddenly went to Wolverhampton Church, I was the youngest there, you know, by far, you know. So people talk about there's not enough young people in spiritualism today. Well, it was like that when I came.
Yeah.
So I was an anomaly. And so what I wanted to do, I was 20, about 24, 25. I came up with the idea and gave it to the NEC to put together, an organization to basically challenge and change the services and do different services. Change the music. I mean, you know, I can say this without blowing my own trumpet, but all of the music that's now at the Arthur College, all of the new radical music and in the churches, I started that with Spirit of Youth, you know. We use different music. And when I was given as a course organizer, I was the youngest course organizer ever at the Arthur College when I was given Spirit of Youth. And that was a course to basically not just for young people, but to encourage new ideas, new platforms, new ways of doing things. Because I saw there was spiritualism had a great product, but a packaging that was outdated.
Yes.
And so we came up with so many different ideas. I mean, in Longton, we did a big Spirit of Youth exposition there.
We
the
still
one
got the
evening.
books, you know.
You still got the books, have you?
Yeah.
But also as well, you've got a picture in your in the medium's room of Gordon
Yes.
by pencil,
Yes.
or ink, and that was done by Nigel Smith,
Yeah.
who was on the committee of Spirit of Youth, and he took that because when we launched Spirit of Youth, we had all of these big pictures that Nigel had drawn of Gordon, of Alfred Kitson, of Emma, the Fox sisters, and Andrew Jackson Davis, and so we were attempting to bring the past into a modern representation of the future.
Yeah.
And I ran it for 5 years, you know, and we did so many different things. That's where Brian Robertson and myself created Talking Heads, which has now gone into SNUI and the churches in the Arthur Finney College. But Brian Robertson and myself began that at Spirit of Youth to get across a different way of the philosophy. But it was basically, and we changed the 7 principles, and I remember sitting writing them.
Yeah.
And when we did an interpretation of the principles, there was literally uproar, absolutely uproar. And I was visiting the churches, and I thought I was going to be flayed alive because you dare to rewrite the principles. And I said, I haven't written the principles like, you know, the fatherhood of God became the power, the brotherhood of man, harmony is in. Communion of spirits, the ministry of angels, you know, it was the dead speak, let's talk. And so, but trying to get across the idea that actually we hadn't changed the principles, but we put them into a language that people may make them accessible. Yeah. That was the whole point. For me, the saddest thing after I gave up Spirit of Youth is that the principles I'd rewritten as the principles were only meant to be temporary. It was to encourage people to put them in their own language. And then they became codified as the Spirit of Youth principles. And they weren't supposed to be like that. They were supposed to be temporary. They were supposed to challenge people to go, how would you interpret that? You know, but people got so frightened, and I had so much flack and so much criticism from people because, you know, you're doing all of this new music and you're doing it in a different way. You know, it was almost like, well, what sorcery is this? You know,
making people very uncomfortable in their nice, comfy positions.
Well, the irony of the furore with the 7 principles, which I thought was hilarious, was the fact that back then nobody even mentioned the 7 principles, let alone rewrite them. So very often it was the first time they'd ever seen them when we actually changed them. You know, so that was quite funny.
And also, yeah. Spiritualist Aid as well.
Spiritualist Aid, yep. I was on the committee of that, which was started by Sue Brotherton and Helen. I
remember Sue.
Yeah, and I was just speaking to Helen Lyne just the other day, actually. Yeah, they did sterling work by putting demonstrations on, again using new music. I mean, Sue Brotherton brought in I Have a Dream from ABBA, which is still going strong to this day, you know, and she was the first person to play that, you know, and so I can honestly say back then we were at the vanguard of sweeping change. I think the saddest thing today is that we're still having this conversation in spiritualism about the same things that, you know, Spirit of Youth was trying to change 30 years ago, basically.
Yes.
You know, I really hope that we'd have come a little bit further than we did, but hey, not to worry, we still keep plugging away.
And in the intervening years of your, well, vocation and our lives, we stepped away for a while, and when we came back, Mr. Simon James had become a minister and he was no longer living in the UK. So how did that all come about, your move? Well,
that was back in 96 I first went to Canada to the Open Door.
Yeah,
there we are. And Brian Robertson, the minister of the Open Door and teacher of the Open Door, president of the Inner Quest Foundation, president of the Open Door, was basically doing all of the stuff I was doing in Spirit of Youth. He'd already created this radical platform back then.
Yeah.
And back then it was quite interesting because a lot of mediums who were then traveling overseas were basically taking, were almost like missionaries to basically countries that had never seen the light. So England actually thought itself as the great hope of the savior of the world with spiritualism. I got to the open door, and Brian had already done all of this and set it all up as a very radical a way of doing things, and yeah, way ahead of its time. Anyway, cut long story short, Brian was also working at the Althorny College back then, and I went over to the open door because he'd saved it from bankruptcy. He turned it around because if you can, go this way. When Brian first walked into the sanctuary, the steps are falling down. It was a shell of what it is now.
Yeah.
And he turned it around. So when I sort of appeared, it was starting to build. And so I was asked by the committee. I went over for a holiday, a break, and so I was asked to stay. Would you like to come and stay? So I stayed for 12 months. And then, do you want to stay another 12 months? Because I was putting programs together with Brian and creating a variety of different programs. And so I stayed. And then, well, do you want to stay permanently? And at this time, I was coming back to the England. I was still working here at the Althorny College along with Brian, and we became course organisers for a bunch of different weeks at the college. And he was working in his own right on different weeks and different course organisers. So I stayed, and I decided to call Canada my home, Victoria, which is fantastic because it's a beautiful place to live. I'm very proud of that community. I miss it very much at the moment because obviously I'm here in the UK. Yeah. And so, yes, so when you came back, Kath, I had vamoosed to the colonies.
You'd gone. Mind you, when we came back, there was a lot of people who weren't around anymore. We first walked back into Longton Church some years ago now, and we only knew one person. And, we felt strangers, and yet it had always been part of our lives for such a long time, and is again. And I know that you were going to come to us because, of course, you were also on the day that we reopened in the new building. I know you were there too, weren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, because what was interesting is for me, and it was popped into my mind not long ago. I know Paul and I did the last demonstration at the old church, the old church, and I remember when Paul created Longton, and my goodness, I mean, the blood, sweat, and tears that he did to create the church.
He lost his hair over that.
I'm surprised he didn't lose his life over it, not just his hair at the time. I was around then. I remember it very well. And I remember was there at the opening. And so obviously being over here, it would have been so great to come to the anniversary of the reopening. Yeah. And I think it's wonderful to be able to look back and see where we've all come from and where we go, and whether we take a break or whether we move to a different country. And I think the thing is that you follow the spirit wherever it takes you, and you have to also. And I think this is where people make the mistake: is mediumship is not about escaping from life, though a lot of people do that. Mediumship basically forces you more into life than you ever did before. Because if you're just using it as a band-aid to get away from life, then do something else. Yes. Because you're not using it for the purpose that it is. It's ultimately about taking you back to your own soul. And so I'm fortunate to say that I've got two homes. I've got my home in Canada, and at the moment I've got my home and my roots here in the UK. Do you
think that your accent's changed slightly since you've been back in the UK for these past 6 months?
It's For those of you who don't know the Black Country dialect, that means it isn't, or it hasn't, past tense. It hasn't. So yes, my accent has sort of returned a little bit, and I know when I go back home, it will be modified again because that I just will not be understood. So it does move backwards and forwards from time to time, and just so I forget where I am. But the connection with Longton, the connection with Gordon, is still there back home because when I got to the open door, there was already a picture of Gordon in the
oh wow,
in there, and we're so lucky because there's a picture of Gordon, a beautiful picture of Gordon, and there's also a beautiful picture of Fanny Higginson that Hazel gave us, a copy of the one, that beautiful one of Fanny, and we've got that in the mediums room. So the connection, if you will, just because I moved to Victoria didn't mean that I left where I came from behind. Far from it.
I know. And I know that you and Paul had a lovely relationship and friendship with Hazel as well, didn't you, both of you? I know that you kept in touch, even though you weren't physically here. I know that you still kept in touch with Hazel.
Yes, I mean, whenever we were over, we always tried to see her and go and catch up, and also Deborah Skelton would write to her as a pen pal. That backwards and forwards, she became very good friends with Leslie and Bert over it. And I think also as well, one of the things with what happens with mediums often is, which is all I always had difficulty with it when I lived in England, is you would take a friend or you take someone to a church and they would say, well, and what do you do? To them, and I always thought it was a ridiculous question, because you wouldn't go to a Catholic church and you'd meet the priest's mother or the priest's brother or the priest's friend and you go, and what do you do? Like I had birth to him. I think that was enough, that question in spiritualism and in mediumship still irks me today. What do you do?
Yes.
Well, I don't do anything. I just am, and the question should be is not what do you do, is who are you? Well, and if you're a spiritualist, the answer should be I'm a spiritualist, not a medium, and don't get me started on this because we'll be here all night. But that idea of wearing a badge of pride, I'm a medium, and particularly Hazel, the support network that Gordon had around him and the community that he had around him, of people who they would, by today's standards, they would be, well, what have you got out of this? You don't develop, you don't do anything. Yeah. Well, I do, because I support the man whose focal point, whose mediumship moves this community.
Yes, they were loyal to the bitter end.
Exactly. But their value was no less than Gordon's because they didn't demonstrate,
and he didn't view them any less either.
Absolutely. And this is today, and again, this is my bugbear, so brace yourselves. But we are very lucky at the Open Door, because we have created, Brian Robertson, myself, which was already there when I arrived, a wonderful community of people that are not mediums in the evidential sense, but they are some of the finest mediums I've ever met, because they are the best artists, they are the best cooks, they are the best bakers, they are the best cleaners, they are the best gardeners, they are the best healers, and they are the best at what they do, and the mediumship shines through them. And that was the greatest lesson that I took from Gordon, is that he encouraged always the spirit to move that person to find the ability that was expressed.
Yes.
And that's why he had such a brilliant community of people around him to allow him to do what he does. And Brian and myself are so lucky with the community that we have, and I love the bones of the people who are part of my community back in Victoria, because they're just the best, you know, because they support us, they support the sanctuary, they plant the window boxes, they put the sprinklers in, they paint the church. You know, we came away one day, they came back, they painted the church for us, they fixed the steps, they do the gardening. We came back the one year from a trip working to Australia that created a brand new stained glass window, you know, to surprise us. These people are just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, you know, you would need basically a gun to get them on a platform to demonstrate, because they don't need to demonstrate. They just need to be themselves.
Yes.
And that's why I consider myself so lucky. And that's what Gordon had. You didn't see people constantly trying to push him out the way to get on the platform, you know? And this is where we've lost it today, which for me is spiritualist community should be about the community. And if the mediumship turns into evidential mediumship that works on a platform, so be it. If it develops to become healing mediumship, so be it. If it's inspirational mediumship, so be it. If it's prophetic mediumship, so be it. But if it's cleaning mediumship, so be it. If it's cooking mediumship, so be it. If it's sitting and listening and holding somebody's hand, it's the companion mediumship. And that's why Brian and myself coined the phrase in the work that we do and in the book that we've written, Magician to Mystic. You know, it's everyday mediumship. And that phrase we created, Brian and myself, to actually bring mediumship back into its practical application.
Yeah.
From instead of this competitive, I love me, who do you love style, which was never ever part of the mediumship that I was taught by Gordon.
No.
Or that existed in Longton Church.
No, never was it? Never was. And obviously you do what you do now. When you started college and university, before you fell upon Wolverhampton Church, what ambitions did you have? What do you think you'd be doing if you weren't doing what you're doing and you hadn't have gone there?
Well, by rights, I shouldn't be talking to you tonight because I should be a clinical psychologist.
Right.
That was my career path. That's where I was heading. I was supposed to be a clinical psychologist. And I took the wrong turning and ended up here.
Do you think
I took the right
turning
and ended up here. Exactly.
Yes.
You know, no, I set out to be a clinical psychologist. That was my ambition. Because psychology has always been intrinsic to what I do. It's one of my great loves, because I just love the way mind works.
Yeah.
It's had me in great good stead in working with what I do, and that's why Gordon wanted me to introduce psychology to the Arthur Findlay College, because over the years, and today I see it more and more, the damage that mediumship does to people, not mediumship per se, but the wrong teaching or the wrong application of mediumship per se to people.
Yeah, that journey is damaging for some, isn't it?
Very damaging, and he was toxic, basically. Yeah. And so many mediums are so unhappy, you know, and all of my friends on here, I've got 1,001 stories of how imbalanced mediums are, because obviously by its very nature, it creates an imbalance of the mind. That's how it works, you know. It's natural only in the sense that, and again, you know, please stop me because this is my bugbear and my platform that I'm very passionate about. But, you know, when people wear a badge of pride that they're a medium, to me, I was like, so what? You know, big deal. Are you interested in the label or are you interested in the service?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's always been about. Mediumship was never been about the individual. It was about the service that ability provides for individuals. And that's what it's about. But because it's not taught how it used to be, and also people were also filtered out from the teaching, we now have so many mediums who, you know, are mentally unbalanced, for want of a better description, because they are so filled with their own lack of self-worth that they fill themselves with mediumship.
Yes.
And that's basically the worst thing you can fill yourself with.
Yes.
Because
I think what I have witnessed over the years is many mediums, many people stand on a platform, and the biggest issue that I am aware of with them is that they don't feel they are enough.
Oh, absolutely. And well, let's put it this way. And again, let's be honest, you know, and I think I'm qualified to say this after this long doing this. And this is something that Brian Robertson always says, and he said this at the service of the Westminster District Council just the other evening. You know, if mediumship was demonstrated where a medium came onto a platform and was hidden behind a curtain,
yeah,
you couldn't see the medium and the medium couldn't see the audience, how many people would want to be mediums?
One or two.
Absolutely. Wouldn't be very popular, would it?
No, not being seen. No,
exactly.
Not being seen.
And in its ancient form, mediumship was never about a performance.
No.
It was never a public performance. Now we can't really put the genie back in the bottle of demonstrating mediums. And I'm sure there were many people who would listen to this now who would be aghast that I would say, stop demonstrating. But I've just said it, stop demonstrating. You know? I'll say it again, in case nobody's heard. But the point here is, why do you want to work on a platform? Do you want to serve? That's great. Or do you want to be seen? If you want to be seen, get off the platform and go and see a therapist.
Yeah.
Because that's not what it's about. If you want to be seen, if you're using now, obviously there's a lot of people who choose this work and they don't know they need to be seen. And they only find that out afterward.
Yeah.
And well, if that's brought you to that place, then wonderful, because mediumship then has taken you to a place where you've discovered your need that needs to be fed. But again, don't use mediumship to feed a hole in your life. Yeah. That's not what it's about. Only the divine, only God can fill the hole. Only you can make choices in your life to fill what's missing in your life.
Yeah.
But the actual faculty of mediumship will never fulfill your life at all. All it will do is make you more sensitive to what you're missing. Yeah. Because ultimately mediumship is about healing. And so
the fulfillment aspect gets further away then, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why you see so many mediums today, they're constantly chasing fame and fortune. And, you know, I bow to the master's wisdom in this, in Gordon Higginson. There's a quote that we put up from the Open Door about a quote of Gordon's about fame and fortune were always a danger in this work because they are distractions. You know, and I know Paul spoke about this in an interview not long ago. Gordon could have made millions of pounds.
Yeah.
Millions of pounds in this. And he never did. You know, never did.
He was quite poor, really, and financially.
You know,
in other ways, he was a millionaire, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Poverty. You know, if you've got, you know, the great Gordon Higginson, you know, principal of the Arthur Finney College, president of Longton, president of the SNU, has got a bucket in the room where the rain's falling to catch the rain through the roof.
Yeah.
You know, that's a bit like, you know, equivalent to the Pope saying, "Oh, look, there's a hole in the Sistine Chapel." You know, it's a recognition that this work can attract people who there is an innate need for service, and yet that they receive healing along the way, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But if there are many people out today whose need is to be seen,
yeah,
those to me, that's a big danger.
I'm personally always wary of people who wouldn't be seen in the kitchen making a cup of tea. Absolutely. Oh no, I can't do that. And yet I don't understand why. You want to be handing the books out, you want to do a reading, but you don't want to go make anybody a cup of tea. Every aspect of every bit of service we do is equally important as the next, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, in our community, you know, we all muck in, you know. I'm the vice president and one of the ministers, Brian's the president and head minister, you know, and we all muck in, we all clean the kitchen floor, we all vacuum, and I've had my hand down that toilet more than once, you know, and I wasn't cleaning my chakras, you know.
Let's not go on to that subject, Simon.
The thing is, somebody's got to clean the toilet.
Yes.
You know, and so don't come to me, you know, walking around in a pink cloud of auric loveliness, if you don't know what a toilet brush is, you know, because it just ain't going to cut any mustard at the open door. No. Because these, and it wasn't the same with you know, at Longton. Spirituality is about practicality. Feet on the ground, head in the clouds. That's how it works. Yeah. But you know, if mediumship, if you think you're somebody special as a medium, then you understand nothing, and you have learned nothing as a medium.
That's right. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Do you know it's 8:50?
Good grief.
I know we could go on for hours, couldn't we? But I won't keep you, because I know life is very busy, even though you're not where you want to be. And I know that we don't know when that will happen, but I know that you'll be so excited to return to Canada. And I hope that you get your wish sooner rather than later, Simon. It's been absolutely beautiful to talk to you. What do you think you're going to do when you get back home?
Well, what I want, what I'm desperate for, it's a Canadian thing. I want an A&W veggie burger. They do the best veggie burgers. I want to go to a restaurant called the White Spot, and they do the best blueberry shake. It's just the best. And once I've eaten that, then I want to have some poutine, which is, if you never had poutine, it's chips with gravy. Now, here's the French bit, because it's from Quebec, with cheese curds on top.
Ooh.
It is fantastic.
I'll take your word for it.
It is absolutely fantastic. To me, it's chips and gravy, which is obviously a black country delicacy, and with that little French je ne sais quoi of the French curds on top. So you've got the best of both worlds. So that's that's Simon's stomach wanting to be gratified. But I really just want to. I'm looking forward to being back in my community of the Open Door, which to me is just the best. You know, we chat with them every Sunday. We have group chat like this. We all check in and see what we're up to, how we're doing. You know, and I love them to pieces. And to me, the Open Door is just that wonderful echo of what I saw when I began at working at Longton. So there's some beautiful memories.
Just a few years ago now. I was going to ask you something then that flew into my mind. Oh, yes. Do you think Dudley's changed a great deal then?
I'm trying to think how we can basically end this interview on a really positive note.
We can change the subject.
Dudley has changed a little. There's been there's some positive stuff. The statuary and the artwork around, I thought, has been quite remarkable. Mm-hmm. All it needs now is just some shops, and that would be good, you know. But I'm hoping that I will regenerate the area, because, you know, it's where I grew up. I love the town, and I would love to see it back to its former glory. That would be wonderful.
I'm sure. Well, I hope that you get all your wishes come true, and of course, we don't know when things are going to change for the better in terms of being able to move about again and doing what we want to do. I know that we all have these restrictions, but thank you so much. I've loved talking to you. I hope it's not been painful for you.
I've had a really great time, Kath. It's been lovely reminiscing. And thank you for those of you who have joined to listen. It's been very
it's all live on Facebook, so I know that everybody there will enjoy it too. So thank you for being with me tonight. I shall end it and everybody will just disappear. So I'll message you in a minute just to make sure that you're all right. Is that okay?
Yes, of course, Kath. Thank
All
you
right
very
then.
much for
Thank you,
inviting me.
everybody. I hope you've all enjoyed it too. I know I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you.
Night.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.